Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Rafe Mair, former BC Cabinet Minister and Canada's most successful radio talk show host. Welcome to the show.
Jim, always a pleasure.
Bill C-51, anti-terrorist bill. The limits on questioning a suspect: you can't kill him, you can't rape him. That's it.
It's appalling, Jim. It really and truly is. First of all, we really have no idea what these things are that the government's got to protect, whether or not they're pipelines, etc. It's not spelled out. It's very vague. But the most important thing, I think, is that the right to protest is not spelled out. It's sort of there. You can protest, all right, but whether or not you've gone beyond that and become a terrorist is up to the policeman on the spot. So I presume that if I stand in front of a tractor, which I fully intend to do if I'm well enough, then they're going to call me a terrorist because that's outside the mere holding of signs or shouting or so on. But I think the real point is that it should be there. I mean, we've got along for centuries without having this kind of thing in our civil law. And to now think that people who are legitimately protesting pipelines or LNG plants or so on might be tabbed as terrorists because the RCMP, who are politicized as hell, as you know, the RCMP decide that they're going to lay a terrorism charge and not trespass or whatever they normally would do. I mean, that's appalling. You think about what that means to our country. I mean, is this the country that I've lived in all these years? It's unbelievable.
Our grandfathers died on the beaches of Normandy, so we wouldn't be treated as suspects in our own country. And yet here we are. Anyone who opposes the government in any way, it seems now, could be labeled a terrorist. How could you even have a political debate and not be labeled an anti-government terrorist?
Well, of course, that's the whole point. You really can't. I suppose that there is an elasticity to the enforcement of this. The government will be nice to you if you're nice back to them. But there is the point. What if you're not? You know, this is not new either, Jim. You go back to 1997 on the APEC conference here, where a young law student at that time, because he's a senior lawyer now, was holding up a cloth sign saying free speech, democracy, and the police jumped him, threw him in the backseat of a car, tied him up, and took him off to jail. The irony was they didn't know where the jail was because they came from out of town. He had to tell them. But, you know, this has been going on. We've been seeing this coming for a long, long time, and we really haven't done enough about it.
Why do you think the government feels it's so necessary now to curtail free speech with the threat of having your constitutional rights taken away?
Well, I think it's sort of this. I hope your listeners will bear with me. It's sort of like the question, why does a dog scratch his balls? Because he can. And they can get away with it now. And I think that's what's happening. Harper realizes that he's got the solid right will stay with him no matter what he does. And he can probably split the vote elsewhere and just keep on doing what he wants to do. But I just hope that people, your listeners, all of us, understand how serious this is. This isn't just some sort of a little game that we're playing here that nobody has to be worried about. Everybody has to be worried about this, and well, it's frightening.
Well, people get outraged when they see YouTube videos of police officers violating people's rights with being too rough, for that poor black man in New York who was choked to death because he was selling single cigarettes on the street. What's going to happen when they now have the backing of the law that tells them they can do anything they want to you?
Well, we see signs of this coming, too. It wasn't that long ago, a few weeks ago, I guess, a couple of weeks ago, we saw that picture of Prime Minister Harper with a rifle in his hands on a farm, urging people to take the law into their own hands if there were no policemen around. And it came very close to the U.S. idea of everybody packs a gun and so on. So this is what we're creeping towards, I think, Jim, and it just scares the hell out of me. And what we see happening in the United States with almost a black kid a week being killed or choked or whatever it is, and you say it can't happen here. Yes, it can happen here. And I think we see the signs of it starting to happen here.
What about putting the weight on a judge's shoulders to decide if the Constitution should be suspended while an investigation takes place? Didn't they swear an oath to uphold the law?
Well, I suppose. I don't know whether that is going to be sufficient, though. a lot of things are placed on judges that really ought not to be placed there at all. And, you take, for example, the protests we have now where normally the company will take somebody to court, have them get an injunction, and then if they disobey the injunction, they take the guy back to court and he goes to jail for contempt of court. The judges hate that. I mean, I know personally from the judges, and a lot of them have written on this, that this is just absolutely outrageous that we should be called upon to turn a civil case into a crime and enforce a law that doesn't exist. So, the judges may or may not be able to step in and keep our rights going for a while, but that's not where it ought to be. It ought not to be the law in the first place. That's the whole point.
We'll have more with Rafe Mair right after this.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
In Goddard we trust.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Rafe Mair. Rafe, what can the average citizen do? I know the government says if you're a law-abiding Canadian, you don't have to worry, but I've heard other dictators say the same thing. If you're a law-abider, you don't have to worry.
Well, I'll tell you, all those people in Burnaby that protested against Kinder Morgan, as far as I'm concerned, are not only law-abiding citizens, they're great citizens standing up for the rights of all of us. Now, under this new legislation, it very well could be that every one of them would be terrorists, or enough of them would be terrorists to scare everybody off. And here is the point I think that everybody's missing, Jim. This law is going to scare people away from protesting, which is their right to do. And this is what worries me more than anything else. So people will just let governments and companies get away with whatever they want to get away with because they're scared of being labeled a terrorist. And that's a terrible piece of legislation that would do that.
I remember the day of action back in the 90s when 200,000 people went on strike in BC to protest government policies. Well, that would have been 200,000 people labeled as terrorists.
Could be. That's the whole point. Now, in practical matters, they probably wouldn't label everybody, but they'd label enough so it would scare the hell out of everybody else. You pick out a few people that are leaders and put them in jail for terrorism, and it soon gets everybody else pretty scared too. And you take the protest in Burnaby, that did a hell of a lot of good, Jim. That woke up a lot of people in British Columbia, and the fact that everybody in Alberta thought it was a crazy thing to do proves to me it was the right thing to do. And if those people had been faced with terrorism charges, or just a half a dozen of them, a couple of those professors, etc., you could be damn sure that most everybody else would say, well, look, I believe pretty strongly in this, but a terrorist? No, I don't want to be branded a terrorist.
Well, the thing, too, is all those people are now innocent because Kinder Morgan gave the police the wrong coordinates for their property.
I know. It's if I may say so, it goes back to Mair's Axiom 1, which is you make a serious mistake assuming people in charge know what the hell they're doing. It's awfully scary. You have these horrible laws based on such meager facts and facts that are so easy to screw up. Well, I don't know what I can say, Jim, except it's in a long life I've never seen anything like this. Even in wartime, I never saw anything like this.
I've noticed the Canadian government has stopped making big noises about China's violation of human rights because they plan to do the same.
Exactly. And this is the way of mankind, And during the Kinder Morgan Burnaby thing, I got pretty hot and bothered about some of that, and the whole question of civil disobedience came up. And I think I made the right point when I said we would not have a single solitary right had it not been for civil disobedience at the time. The establishment never gives up anything unless it's taken away from them. And we must remember that. We wouldn't have free speech, freedom of movement, presumption of innocence, none of those things, had those rights not been taken by ordinary people by disobeying the people who were in charge. Now, I think you'll have to remember, too, the people in charge, the establishment, they make laws that suit them that they can hide behind. Then they pontificate that people should obey the law, harumph. It's outrageous. And when people say, no, we're not going to, we're going to stand against that law because it's unjust, and you don't allow them to do that, then you've lost the very essence of the democracy we have.
Canada already has legislation, the War Measures Act, that can suspend all your constitutional rights. Why do they have to bring in something new?
Well, they don't. They don't. I mean, in my mind, they'd be better off to repeal the War Measures Act. When Trudeau used that back in 1970, I think it was, I can remember clearly. I was up in Kamloops at the time, and then I was a member of the Liberal Party. And I remember John Turner coming on as Minister of Justice, saying that he would explain the whole thing in the fullness of time and satisfy Canadians this had to be done. Well, he hasn't. Nobody has ever since. And I got so damn mad, I quit the party at that point, never went back. But, you know, it was just absolutely outrageous to do that sort of thing over a few people in Quebec who committed crimes that there are already laws against, kidnapping and murder. Now, you know, if they could do that in Quebec, imagine what they could do with this legislation, with Bill C-51 across the country. If they could do that just and it was a terrible thing in Quebec, don't misunderstand me, but if they could put the entire country under martial law for that in 1970, imagine what these guys can do with Bill C-51 in 2015.
The BC Civil Liberties Association has protested several times about it's illegal in Canada to spy on people engaged in legitimate activities. They've filed another complaint against the federal government. The problem is, if the federal government is found in violation of the Constitution, there is no set punishment for it.
No, that's the whole problem, and it's well, you know, I don't know what more we can say. Really, it's got to the point now where the public are really having their last gasp. If we don't stop this in its tracks, then we are in trouble for a long, long time. It'll take decades before we get it back again.
Rafe, thanks a lot for chatting with us.
Jim, it's always a great pleasure.
And glad to hear that you're back on your feet.
Well, sort of. I'm back on my bum anyway.
Thanks a lot again.
My pleasure, Jim. Bye-bye.
My guest has been Rafe Mair, former BC Cabinet Minister and Canada's most successful radio talk show host. You're listening to The Goddard Report on TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Check out our popular YouTube channel, Talk Digital Network. We're also on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Comments about the show can be sent to info@howstreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on The Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.